ever have a moment where you felt like, wow, this is why I went through, everything that I have?
All the time, like it's no accident that I would play certain characters because there's a depth that you have to go to, depth of suffering that you have to pull from in order to convey an authentic emotion. You know, technical ability can't give you that. Talent can't give you that. Life is what gives you that. Do you know what I mean?
From SGI USA, I'm Cassidy Bradford, and this is Buddhability, the weekly series where I talk with Buddhists from all walks of life about the power we each have to change our lives and the world around us. Hi, Cassidy from Buddhability here. If you're enjoying the show, don't forget to subscribe. It'll help the show out, and you'll never miss an episode. If you want more Buddhability content, you can subscribe to our email newsletter in the link below. We put out great content every week. Enjoy the show. Welcome to Buddhability, Adewale. So good to have you here. Before I get started, I just want to, first of all, thank you for taking this time for us. I'm really excited for people to be able to hear your story because I think it's really interesting, the bits and pieces that I know so far, but I will also be discovering with our listeners today. So one kind of question to open up, Buddhism is not that common in the US or in the UK. So I was wondering what people say or how they respond when they find out you're Buddhist.
It's a mixture of things. Some are surprised, depends what community as well. Within the Black community, some are surprised. Some are aware because they have a friend or family member or associate that practices, or they may have seen Tina Turner's movie, and so they have some kind of understanding. It's always met with positivity, I never kind of foist it on people. It's just a part of who I am. Just as if you were a Christian or if you're a Muslim. They ask me, what religion am I? I said, I'm a Buddhist. It's pretty simple.
It's also, I think, really in the way that you live your life. When I grew up, I started practicing Buddhism. Well, my mom started practicing when I was young. Right. And I didn't want to tell people for a while, and I was really hush-hush about it. But as I've gotten older, it's this is just part of who I am, and people know me as the Buddhist friend.
Yeah, I can relate to that because I think in the early days of my practice, it was not as common, even though now it's in 192 places with 13 million people around the world practice. Still, for the majority of people, it was, something that was strange. And so that kind of gave me hesitancy to actually, speak about it. But I chanted a lot about that. And after I chanted about it, I'm like, well, why do I feel like that? People talk about Christianity all the time. I see people on the podium always thanking God, and just makes sense for me to just at least share what I believe in, and also the foundation of my life and success. So if people want to know, but most importantly, as you said, it's your life condition, how you live. That actually makes people curious, inquisitive, because it's one thing talking about it, but it's another thing living it with your life. And then people will see that, they'll say, oh, why are you always happy even though things are going wrong? Or why, or they'll see your attitude and they'll say, and they'll ask questions. So it happens now in an organic way, but I did chant a lot about that, and came to the conclusion that, hey, this is who I am. I should never be afraid or embarrassed or ashamed of who I am and what I believe, particularly because it's the foundation of my happiness and the success that I have in my life.
Yeah, it really is in every moment the way that I live my life, and people do recognize oh, there's something about you. And I think there's a difference between thinking a philosophy is nice and really like engraving it in your daily life. But of course, I know you didn't grow up practicing Buddhism like I did. It was, later into adulthood that you started practicing. But before we get there, I wanted to talk a little bit more about your childhood. I know a little bit about it from watching the film that you wrote and directed, and I imagine it's been really, foundational to who you are in your life. So I'd love for you to share just a little bit of that story.
As some people may be aware from my directorial debut entitled Farming, farming was a term used by social workers when I was a child to describe a phenomenon that used to occur in Britain between the 60s throughout the 90s, whereby tens of thousands of African, particularly Nigerian immigrants were fostered or farmed out to white working class families. The idea behind that was that the Nigerian parents and immigrants coming to Britain would think that their children could learn English quicker, get an education, whilst they, in tandem, were working and studying at night to build their lives. So the idea was that once they'd accomplished what they'd set out to do, become educated and got some finance together, they would then return to collect their children and return back to their native country to form the Nigerian new middle class, as it were. But as you know, with any best laid plan, there are always trials and tribulations. And so I was one of those children that went through that farming process along with a couple of my siblings. And I was fostered to a white working class family at 6 weeks old. And what was interesting is my parents, though well-intentioned, did not know the kind of society and how it would receive children. And they placed us in an area where we were basically the only black children, the first in that. And at the time there was a very, very kind of, I would say, negative attitude toward the influx of immigrants at that time. And it took the form of gangs on the streets, racist slurs, keep Britain white, and even attacks quite commonly, just to get to school. With my sisters, you'd be attacked by dogs and bricks thrown at you, and it was quite violent. And so it was a very tough way to grow up, and I was under no illusion as to what life was going to be like for me as a young black boy growing up in England at that time. And my father at the time, foster father, he was a lorry driver, a truck driver, a long distance, so it took him away for periods of time. So he was not there to really protect me. And so he basically said, you're going to have to go out and fight for yourself. And he literally pushed me out the door and he said, if they come at you, you have to pick up a brick and hit them back. And so that was the tough love that he had to administer then, because he wasn't around. And he said, I won't be there and so that was kind of, the environment that I grew up as a young child. And, also just being with the foster family, there were new things to understand about raising black children in a white society that was racist. There was a level of ignorance that, it wasn't intentioned, but it was just through lack of knowledge, whether it was how to handle the skin, the hair, and just the onslaught of external racism. So in the house, outside, it was a very confusing, quite a lonely time for me as a child. There were moments of joy that I managed to have, because there were quite a number of other Nigerian children in the house at the time. There was maybe at one time there could have been 9 or 10 of us all in the house. and they rotated. So some would stay for a couple of years, some would stay for a year. So what that did as a child, it never allowed you to connect with someone. Just as you were, they were gone. And so it made you clam up emotionally and not, you know, want to attach, because for fear of losing that attachment, because they would disappear. So I learned to understand why I went through that. But at the time, as a young boy, you know, it was a hard way to start life. Yeah.
I can't even imagine like how that like shapes your sense of self or like vision for your future as a young child, and then, you know, becoming teenager. How did you experience yourself in the world, and what were your hopes moving forward for your life? Did you have any big dreams?
At that time, not really.
Yeah.
There weren't really any black role models, as it were,
Yeah.
to really aspire to or look up to in England, Southeast England, Tilbury. There just weren't any. It was just really a matter of just surviving.
Yeah.
You know, just to be able to live a life where you weren't constantly persecuted, because the reality was at that time, you know, whether on the streets, in the schools, wherever, I was always considered inferior, less than, not worthy of respect, not worthy of attention. You know, you were always degraded as black, or, you know, there are other slurs that they, you know. So as a young boy, I don't know if hope was something that I had. It was more about survival.
Yeah.
And just managing to get through. But as I said, you know, there were moments of happiness between the kids, because, you know, we wore second-hand clothes up until I was 16. We didn't have new clothes. We just got them from the gypsies and but that was a source of joy for us, you know. We get a bag of clothes, they were second-hand, but we didn't know any better, and we loved that. So there were simple things, you know, and I think the best moments that I have were with the children, and how we managed to survive and create happiness out of the circumstances that we had. You know what I mean?
Yeah. To be able to like still create joy in any circumstance is like very Buddhist, you know, even if you're not practicing Buddhism at the time. Did you have any, like, did you grow up with any like spirituality or any religion?
Well, I went to, and it's probably one of the reasons my Nigerian parents put us in this area, because I went to a Roman Catholic school that was run by nuns.
Oh.
And initially, so in England, we have what we call primary schools, and it's like from 4 to 11. So, you know, it was heavily indoctrinated with Roman Catholicism. And then my secondary school, which is from 11 to 16, was run by priests. It was an all-boys school. So, as you can imagine, I was raised Roman Catholic. You know, I did the whole, you know, church, choir boy, you know, communion, all of those things that go along with the Roman Catholic, you know, religion is what I was taught, you know. Yeah.
Did that continue like after you left school?
No, because I found that whilst I love the stories and the parables, because I just love history, and also I looked at them as a form of escape from my own reality. So I loved immersing myself in those, but there was just too many questions, particularly when I was a teenager, that were not answered for me. And in the Catholic religion at that time, when I asked questions, I was just told, well, that's what it is. And also as a black boy, I felt it wasn't inclusive. I didn't see myself represented in there. And obviously I was being raised by priests and nuns, and unfortunately they weren't the best examples in my experience at school. So that kind of dissuaded me as well. I'm like, well, if this is how it's meant to run, I mean,
Yeah.
and they're doing this and that, I'm like, well,
Yeah.
but that was just my impression. So whilst there were some things in it that I gravitated to, the parables and stuff, there were just too many unanswered questions, and there wasn't really in my time license for me to question. I was just told, well, this is what it is, this is how it is,
Yeah.
and I was like, okay.
Yeah, I think it's all too common. Fortunately, in Buddhism, like I've always been told, you should ask as many questions, get your answers. But I think that's not like super common in our society to really like question authority or belief systems. So I can imagine the sort of like dissonance, like it just doesn't quite make sense, this belief, but then what I'm really seeing in daily life. So then, as you're entering adulthood, you're not practicing any particular religion. I know once you, I think, became a model is when somebody introduced Buddhism to you. I know it was a photographer. So how did you get to that point?
Well, I think, the thing about growing up in harsh circumstances, it will test your core and your resilience. And on the streets, you're either gonna, survive or you're not. You're gonna continue to run and cower, or you're gonna stand up for yourself. For instance, just my name itself, it was very, different. Adewale, in an English working class culture. So, and wale was a phrase that they used to connote an idiot. It was a slur in that time, and so they would ridicule the name, and so the teachers tried to change that, but my spirit wouldn't take to it. I was like, no. And so just standing up for that, standing up for my name, for myself, and like I said, my foster father's harsh love about having to go out and fight for myself on the street, as well as protect my sisters. That just gave me this sort of sense of survival, not backing down and not giving up. So I think I just took that because I was quite a fragile child. I was not in any way, shape or form, violent. It just was against my nature. But my foster father said this is the only way, because if you don't, they're all going to use you as a doormat in life. And so I think the resilience, the tenacity, and just this ability to just fight for who you are and what you want, I think it came from there. And I just took that into life, it's a huge jump where we're going from childhood to to adulthood. But in short, I cut my hair one day in a barber shop, and somebody said, "Oh, you should be," and it just happened. I was working a part-time job whilst I was at college to try to finance myself through my master's, and somebody just came in and asked me if they could take a picture, and they paid me more than I was earning for my part-time job. So that became a lucrative form of payment for my studies, and took me all around the world. And it was whilst I was doing that, I came across the photographer. He was really nice, and I remember him because we had a conversation, and I was a bit suspicious because I said, is this guy trying to come on to me? You know what I mean? Because he was just really nice, and he was listening, and I was like, what's going on here?
Yeah.
But, in hindsight, it was the first time somebody had actually listened to what I had to say. And I'd never felt that. And I was like, and he's a stranger. So I was like, okay, what does this guy want? And at the end of the conversation, he handed me a magazine, The Art of Living, it was called. And that's the UK subscription. It's a monthly magazine about Buddhism that, you can subscribe to through the SGI. And he gave it to me, and he said, I think you would like this. And then I looked at it, and I was like, no, mate. No, this is some hippie stuff that,
Yeah.
and I was like, nah, you know what? I took it because I was being polite,
Yeah.
but I said, you know, I'll give it to my sisters because they were into what I then called this hippie stuff. So I took it to my sisters, and, you know, they're, you know, older and younger, and they used to, you know, it was like siblings squabble, and they used to fight like cat and dog, and but they took it, and within a short period, I noticed that they started to take it up. And then coincidentally, they met some people that practiced around the corner.
Wow.
And then they started doing this mumbling in the house, and which was quite annoying to me at the time because I had my part-time job. I'd want to come home and rest, and then they would disturb me with this mumbling, and I'd go down and I said, "Can you keep it quiet?" You know, and they'd go louder, and it was very annoying. And they had these neat little shoes in the hallway. And I'll never forget these neat little shoes. They really annoyed me because they were so neat and nice little lines, and I just felt triggered by them. So I'd kick them, and I'd mess them up, and I'm trying to get these people out of the house.
Yeah.
But not knowing that the chanting that they were doing was permeating my life. You know, the remarkable thing was my sisters. I saw how they started to change. They started studying together. They were both studying law. They were passing their exams. I was like,
Wow.
okay. Well, I just said I'll leave them to it as long as they're out of my hair. And that was fine. And so that's kind of what I did. I just left them to it. I was just happy they weren't bothering me and they weren't squabbling. They would still fight, but they would resolve it in a very adult way. And I was like, okay, good. So I just, you know, but I was impressed, and they had this group of people that was still coming in the house mumbling, and I was like, as long as they don't bother me, I'm fine, you know. So so that's how I was first introduced to it. At that time in my life, I was not ready to take it up myself. I just, as I said, I thought it was for hippies, and you know, I was spiritual. But I was very circumspect of religions, and, you know, based on what I'd experienced as a Roman Catholic. So I was like, no, I ain't trying to do all of that. So I left it alone.
Yeah.
And, you know, 10 years later, when a point in my life, when I'd had quite a lot of success in my career, I'd had everything that I'd set out to achieve. I had money in the bank. I was on a huge show that was broken me out. I had a beautiful girlfriend. I had an amazing car, and I lived in Venice. I had a beautiful little cottage. I had everything that I kind of wanted, because it had been hard to achieve. But it was at that point that I felt most depressed, and I couldn't understand what was going on. I was like, I've got everything that I thought that would make me happy. And yet at my highest point of success, I found that I was most unhappy. And, you know, I think the smartest thing I did was to actually press pause in my life and say, okay, I got to figure out what's going on here before I spiral. And so I left LA. I was living in Los Angeles then, and I dropped everything, the house, the car, the girlfriend, everything. And I just came back to London. And now I hadn't been in London for at least 10 years. So there I was. I went back to my Nigerian mother's house in the small bedroom that I lived in at a point with her, and decided to try to figure out what it was that was going on, like why I wasn't. And I surmised that what I had been doing was filling the vacuum with material accomplishments. And it was at the point when I had all of those accomplishments that I realized that, you know, the vacuum was still a gaping hole. There was none of those things were going to fill it. And so I had to figure out, well, what is this gaping hole? And I realized, you know, that there were issues that I hadn't really looked at from my childhood. I think I was in some form of denial. I told myself I had a good childhood, and I think out of respect for my foster parents and my Nigerian parents. I didn't want to be complaining and say, well, they did their best, but really I'd suffered some intense and immense trauma from all the racism, from all the, and I never really dealt with it. I just brushed it under the carpet, went off and said, if I'm successful, I can forget all about that. But it was haunting me and things that I really needed to address. So, and it was quite overwhelming. I got quite depressed for a while and even stopped acting for a while. And then, you know, because I'd gotten very, very down. So much so that one point I just didn't feel any sense of hope. And it was at that point, you know what? I actually started chanting Nam-myoho-renge-kyo. I don't know what it meant. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, totally.
I had no clue what I was saying, but I just started to say it, and I said it a few times, and it started to make me feel a bit better. And I realized much later in hindsight that hearing my sisters and their friends chanting, it had really permeated my life to this core. And, you know, I'd been hearing them chant Nam-myoho-renge-kyo from the living room. It would go up the stairs into my bedroom and into my core. And so that's what I'd started to do. I had no clue what I was saying, but all I knew is it started to make me feel better. And so the next morning I went to my sisters and I was like, what's this stuff you've been doing?
Yeah. What's this hippy dippy stuff?
Yeah. And they just had this big smile and they said, we've been waiting for you. like two, you know, plotting sisters as they were. And they said they'd been chanting at 7 o'clock every Monday for their brother to come and receive Gohonzon. And so that's kind of the full circle when I gave them the book and planted the seed, and it came right around. And it was then when I went to them, they started to show me what the practice was and how to practice. They shared with me this book called The Go-Sho, which were letters written by Nichiren Daishonin, the Buddha of the latter day of the law, to his followers, explaining how the tenets of Buddhism applied to his life and to his followers, you know. And translations, for those who are listening, the Go-Sho just means worthy writings, you know. And I took that book and I read it from the front to the back.
Wow.
And it really was a wow, because the book was like this and I was like this. And it was like, when I read it, it was like the two of mirrored, and it was like my soul had found its home, because all of those questions that I had in my Roman Catholic upbringing were suddenly answered. And it was such a profound revelation for me. My hair grew because I used to shave it bald, you know, and it grew. And that was significant because it was about me really discovering myself.
Wow.
And what I found is, like, this voice that I had been ignoring, had been pushing down. As I read that book, it started to get louder, and I started to listen to the voice in my heart, and it started to tell me who I was, what I should do. And it was such a moving moment, and that's when I started to write.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Okay. This makes sense. Okay, I'm seeing.
Yeah.
Wow.
I started to write about all of the things in my childhood, and that became a manuscript, which I adapted into a screenplay, and which I then went ahead and made into a movie, my directorial debut, Farming. But that all emanated from me reading the Go-Sho and discovering self, you know. Yeah.
So did reading the Go-Sho and chanting, one, it made that like internal voice louder. Did it also give you like courage or confidence to go for it? I mean, because feature-length film is a big undertaking, you know.
And let's be clear, I'd never directed in my life, and I'd never written a screenplay in my life, so I didn't know what I was doing. I was out in the wilderness there. But what it did, first of all, I have to explain, there's, you know, reading the Go-Sho was just one factor. I had such great support from my sisters, from a district leader. A district is just a group of members in your local area that chant together, and there's one particular member who's nominated as the leader. He's just perhaps more experienced and just galvanizes us all, and we all gather together to read from the Go-Sho and other Buddhist material and apply it to our daily lives. So I had a district that was local to me, and I had this wonderful district leader who kind of, cradled me through the practice and showed me, along, the tenets: practice, faith, and study. There's the study part I was doing, reading the Go-Sho, and that strengthens the faith, because you can't go into any religion or spiritual endeavor without knowing what you're believing. You can't just believe it blindly. So the study fed my faith. It gave me the belief. And then there's the practice, which was chanting daily in the morning, Nam-myoho-renge-kyo, and doing Gongyo, which is the worthy prayer, which is essentially, Buddhism is based upon 28 chapters that were written by the Buddha. And we take the two most important of those chapters and recite them before we start chanting, just to cleanse ourselves, as it were, for this sacred prayer. So you would do that practice in the morning, and you do it in the evening, and sandwich your day in this mystic energy, elevating your life condition so that you're making choices based on your highest life condition. Yeah. So he showed me how to do that. So it was a combination of all of those things: the practice, the study, and the faith, that started this. The voice came, and the courage and the wisdom. So what you get when you chant, it's like this innate wisdom within your life. You summoning it forth, and it's giving you the wisdom to understand your life. It's almost like you have a bird's eye view of your life and know where to move and what to do. So it'll give you the wisdom. But the other part is you then have to take fearless and decisive action. You can't it's not just magic and I chant and it'll give you the wisdom.
Yeah.
And then you got to do it. And so, but because as I've said, how I grew up in my childhood with this tenacity, this resilience, this survival, I already know how to take action. So I would get this wisdom, and then I was off. Wow. I did not know how to write a screenplay, but I went and got the computer, I went and got the software, and I taught myself. Wow. And I did not know how to direct, but I took my own money, and I did my first short, because I didn't want people reading the screenplay and having somebody else direct it. So I literally taught myself. I did not know how to finance the movie, but I went out, every set that I was on filming a movie, I showed people my script until one producer said, "I like that, I'll help you put it together." Wow. And I hustled, and that same tenacity I had from a childhood on the street, I applied it to the dream that was going to make me happy. So that's kind of it.
It's making me think of like this concept in Buddhism that we talk about, poison into medicine. It's like this story is so that concept, right? Like something that could cause us like very deep suffering. We can transform it to really nourish our lives and become something positive for ourselves and for others. And so, hearing you, I'm thinking like, the ability to take all of the trauma that you had experienced in your childhood and then transform it into something that can really create value for both yourself in doing it and others that are like learning it. I don't know, would you say that's like an accurate representation?
Yeah, I do, because, one of the most profound principles that I learned when I was reading the Go-Sho and do the practice was changing poison into medicine. But the one that really did resound within my life was this quote that I read from Daisaku Ikeda, who is the president of the SGI that spreads this practice into the West, and he said that each of us have a unique mission and will be born in the appropriate form in order to fulfill it. And I took that to heart. It sounds simple, but because there was a lot of shame attributed to my past, feeling low self-worth, not good enough, I'd been always treated as if I was inferior, so I almost didn't love or like myself because of the way I was brought up, thought I wasn't good enough. But, listening to Daisaku Ikeda's guidance that each of us have this unique mission and we will be born appropriately in order to fulfill it, it started to make me understand why I've been born in these particular circumstances, why it was so harsh at the beginning of my life. It's like forging of the iron, so that I could become tough and strong for the mission that I was going to complete later on in my life. And, I have this other, just taking that quote further, when I break that down, expand on it, what that meant is, for me, is like we choose the parents and the circumstances into which we want to be born, so we may overcome them and become the person that we're meant to become in order to fulfill our own unique mission. This was the guidance, and it just resounded in my life. I'm like, hang on a minute, I chose that?
I don't know if I chose that.
You know what I mean? I was like, but what that did, right, if you're going to believe that, it meant that I could no longer have a victim mentality.
Yeah.
And that was tough.
That's a hard pill to swallow.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a lot of juice in being a victim.
Yeah.
Blaming people, my parents, blaming the people that attacked me. And look, it didn't happen overnight. It took me decades of practicing to really come to live that, where I had an attitude of gratitude, where I could see why I lived this life. So, for instance, Buddhism is based on the writings of the Lotus Sutra. It's called the lotus flower. It's symbolic in Buddhist philosophy, because the lotus flower, as beautiful as it is, and it has this gorgeous aroma, probably the most beautiful flower in the swamp, is born out of the muck and mud and gunk of the swamp, but yet manages to become one of the most beautiful flowers. And I started to realize that my muck and gunk and dirt was my fertilizer that would enable me to become a lotus boy and create value. So when I started to see that, through going through these experiences and then writing the movie, I was able to create value, not only for myself, but validate the experiences of thousands and thousands of people who have been unheard and maybe suffering because of that. So there it was, this lotus boy giving out his aroma and stuff. So I really took that. That was one of the tenets of Buddhism that really resounded, really impacted me, and allowed me to have this attitude of gratitude and then have better relationships with my family, because I wasn't necessarily blaming them, and knowing that I'd chosen my parents, I'd chosen these set of circumstances in order for it to make me the man that I needed to become in this life to complete my mission.
It's something that can be difficult at first. Like, really, these problems are like good for me? Come on. Especially like when you've gone through something like so painful, right? And you can feel so much regret or like, why me? But I found for myself, and I think, many people that I speak to, as you chant, like, okay, why is this my circumstances? It becomes very empowering, you know, and I can look at like the most painful times in my life and think, actually, I have so much appreciation that I had that, because it was exactly what I needed to challenge the weaknesses in my life, you know, the tendencies that caused me to suffer and allowed me to like see that I actually am strong and capable. And, you know, and we can use any struggles to also encourage others. So definitely, you know, that resonates with my own life and experience.
Buddhism really empowered me in a sense that, you know, I didn't go to acting school. I never went to any of the prestigious, you know, RADAs. My RADA was the Rough and Dirty Academy. And I just want people, young people out there that are aspiring to become an actor or an artist or anything in life, really, that to truly understand and know that there are many paths to the same destination, and believe that your path has perfectly equipped you to be exactly where you are. You know, I've performed and acted with some of the greatest actors in this industry, and I feel fully competent that my path has prepared me for that. So when Daisaku Ikeda says each of us have a unique mission and are born appropriately in order to fulfill it, never doubt that. Never doubt your circumstances or how you came up are not appropriate for what you need to be in this life. You know, because that's what makes you unique, you know. And if we all embrace that uniqueness, then that's when the world starts to hum. You don't need to be following. You don't need to be looking left or right. You just need to be embracing who you are and having that attitude of gratitude for what you've been through, because it's that unique process that's going to enable you to give your unique voice. And stick with that, you know, because when they shout action, it's your action they're looking for.
Did you ever have a moment where, or I'm sure there were many moments where you felt like, wow, this is why I went through, you know, everything that I have?
All the time, you know, like it's no accident that I would play certain characters, because there's a depth that you have to go to, depth of suffering that you have to pull from in order to convey an authentic emotion. You know, technical ability can't give you that. Talent can't give you that. Life is what gives you that. Do you know what I mean? And also it makes you relatable to the everyday person, because everybody is going through something. And that's how you make your characters relatable, because you've been through something, you know, and they can feel it. You know, we all have the same thing under our chest, which is a heart. And that's what you want to touch. But you can only really touch that through real emotion. You know, it's not that you have to be a murderer to experience it, but that there are certain commensurate emotions that can give you that same feeling, you know what I mean, out of your life. And you need to tap into those, you know. Yeah, that's it.
Wow.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
My mom used to always tell me, like, I had such big emotions as a kid, really heavy anxiety, lots of tears. And I used to ask my mom, like, why am I experiencing this? And she said, actually, isn't that incredible that you get to experience like this depth of humanity? Not everybody gets to really understand these like deep feelings. And at the time I was like, Mom, what are you talking about? But now, you know, that I support other young people that have experienced the same thing, I feel like, wow, I'm so glad that I know what it is to like have that feeling, and I can really understand others and like have compassion for them. So
I completely agree. Even as a child, my siblings would tease me because whenever I met somebody with a different accent, or I would automatically pick it up and talk to them through that accent. They're like, "Why are you?" And it wasn't a conscious thing; it just happened. And now that is my job, because at the core of that is compassion. you know, because you want to relate to them in terms that they will understand. And that's what that was. And that's what I do as an artist. So like I say, don't knock your natural
Yes.
talents. Enhance, embrace, and express them.
It's all significant.
Yeah. There's nothing that means nothing, man. Yeah.
And one thing I was wondering, you know, you mentioned Daisaku Ikeda, and many of us who practice in the SGI consider him like a life mentor. I'm just curious, like, what that means for you.
I guess growing up, like as I said initially in Roman Catholic, you know, mentor disciple had these kind of authoritarian connotations. So I was like, hey, I'm not down with any of that. But when I chanted about it, it was really quite simple. Daisaku Ikeda, you know, the reason I'm chanting this daimoku, these words, and impacting my life and being able to, you know, become happy, you know, is because of this man. If he never spread it, if he didn't spread it and also live it with his life and show an example of what you can achieve by following the strategy of the Lotus Sutra, I would not be even aware or sitting here today. So it then just became a simple thing that here's a man who is showing me an example of how you can live and what you can achieve by using the strategy of the Lotus Sutra. And he's a remarkable man. I mean, he sat down with, you know, dozens and dozens of statesmen. He's written 30, 40, 50 books. I mean, he does photography, he does artwork, he visits, but he's always spreading this love and unity. He, even in times during war, he was able to sit down with Gorbachev and, you know, or go to Cuba and sit down with, you know, leaders there. So, and he's just an ordinary man. He's not, you know, a government, you know, leader or anything. He's an ordinary man applying the strategy of the Lotus Sutra. And so when you see really what is achievable by doing that, and also, you know, he doesn't stop at what he has achieved himself. It's about how he brings unity and happiness to thousands of other people, because the reality is, I believe this firmly, you're never going to be happy unless other people are happy around you. Yeah, you can have a certain level, but there's no party unless everybody's at the party. and you know, you really, this practice about practicing for self and others. And so sharing it and showing people the potential within their lives that they can achieve through applying the strategy of the Lotus Sutra is part of it. And to be honest, that's probably been one of the most endearing parts of the practice, because when you see somebody else's life change after you share the practice, it's nothing, there's no better feeling, is there?
It's so great.
You're just like, wow. You know what I mean? And you just feel so gratified, and also it grows you in ways that you wouldn't even comprehend through the mind. It's a weird connection that you have when you've shared it with somebody and they've changed their lives through using it. I think that's the greatest gift I get out of it.
Yeah, and I find when I am thinking about others and not just myself, and even though I'm Buddhist, you know, I can think about only myself kind of a lot.
Hey, listen.
You know, it's natural, but, you know, as I chant, of course, like you said, this practice is for ourselves and others. And when I chant about other people in my life, it's like, I don't know, I feel like my life really opens up.
Yeah.
And I feel so much happier. And yeah, when I can share with a friend, and even if maybe they don't want to chant, just something like a Buddhist idea really encourages them. It feels like, wow, so much is possible in the world, you know? I think it's the like hope that it makes me feel when I share with people.
Yeah, I think so. And look, at the bottom of it, it's not about just, you know, propagating and indoctrinating people. It's it's about happiness, because Buddhism, I liken it to like an onion. You know, when you chant Nam-myoho-renge-kyo consistently morning and night, it peels off all of those negative layers in your life that are preventing you from being happy, till you get to the core of who you are. And it's like, well, who wouldn't want to taste and experience that? So, you know, you can share it, plant seeds, people can take it or not.
Yeah.
But it's just who I am. And I always think whoever's having me in their life, that's what they're looking for, because that's what my life is.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And most times I don't have to say it actively. It's like they can see it in your life. You know what I mean? Like from how you behave, how you react to circumstances, you know, to challenges. You know, people can see, you know, the philosophy through that. You know, actions speak louder than words, and then they're asked, "Well, what made you?" You know, and then you share it. So, and the thing about Buddhism, what I love is it doesn't judge anybody.
Yeah.
You know, and it's very welcoming of people of different religions and disciplines, and because there are many similarities.
Yes.
And what I like about Daisaku Ikeda, you know, he's had dialogues with, you know, Christians. Dean Carter, Bishop Dean Carter, who's an extraordinary man. You know, there are books that they've written about Buddhism and the symmetry. So, you know, it's not exclusive, it's inclusive.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about it.
And like, what is our shared humanity,
That's it.
our shared dreams for the future? I think about that when I read some of Daisaku Ikeda's dialogues that he's had. You know, it's always about like, but what do we share? You know,
That's
even
it.
if we have different beliefs or we're totally unique people, there are these shared things that like make us human, you know? And one thing I really love is he always seems to open up dialogues asking about people's like family and parents. And if they're alive, you know, how's your mother doing? Like that kind of care to think about somebody's life, I think is really beautiful. But it's kind of funny, you know, talking about practicing Buddhism, people see it in your life. And, you know, just recently you were in Euphoria in perhaps the very opposite of like seeing, you know, somebody that's like really practicing Buddhism in their daily life. You played Alamo Brown, who is very much a villain. But in my personal take, you know, my wife and I were just talking about this, a very dark character that is very human and has many kind of layers, not just like this black and white, you know, just evil person. I'd love to hear like what it was like doing that role. And, you know, I heard you had to chant a lot in the morning and evening. So what was that experience like?
Well, it was a great experience, but it was a challenging experience because of the realms that you're traversing. You know, they're quite very dark, and it's quite an extended period, 8-9 months to reside in that space. You know, so. But yeah, you know, when I'm playing characters that are fundamentally as dark as Alamo Brown, I have to, you know, hedge up my life condition, which means in practice I will chant an hour or two a day, because these are dark subject matter and vibrations that you're traversing, and you don't want to get kind of influenced and snatched. You need to know your spiritual anchor, where you lie, so that you can pull yourself out when you need to, and you can go in and not, you know, be kind of, you know, snatched, as it were, by it. We are acting in an entertainment medium, but you know, to me, it's a spiritual thing. You know, you're embodying a spirit of this person in order to portray it in an authentic way, you know. And so to me, it was important for me to hedge up my life conditions so that, you know, I didn't get, you know, depressed or snatched up or let the ego ride with it, you know, just, and you know, also to be able to project this sense of humility and humanity, even in the darkness. you know, because I never look at these characters as villains. I look at them as humans trying to deal with the circumstances that they have. I leave the audience to judge. Do you know what I mean?
Totally.
And that's how you show them as humans. And the great thing about playing Alamo is that we did have the opportunity to show his backstory, and people can sympathize, empathize, not necessarily that it justifies, but you can understand the making of the man. And in so doing, understand the workings of society, how things happen. Like, if you're constantly berating a child, if you're corrupting their soul, you know, then there's a cause and then there's effect. And if you're making those fundamentally dark causes, it will have a fundamental effect on the person. It's just, that's what it is.
Yeah.
Now, whether we as the person managed to transform that effect, and unfortunately, Alamo was not a Buddhist.
Yeah.
So,
Could have used Nam-myoho-renge-kyo.
yeah. Even though I was, you know, trying to push it through him, well, he did get to the point before his life where he had an epiphany.
Yeah.
And he realized that all that he had done and gotten was not enough. You know, he had everything but nothing. And then he wanted the simple things. The one word was love, family. But it was too late, because the causes that he'd made, he had to atone for. And so that's the way of life. And the karma of life is very strict. You know, it doesn't matter what you want to do and give to charity. If you've made these causes, these effects, you're going to have to pay for them. And he did. So it was a great character to play, and it was one that really deepened my faith, because I had to read a lot more, I had to chant a lot more, and I was very, very grateful for that opportunity to deepen my faith through this character.
So what did it look like when, you know, in the morning before you're going to shoot and you're like, okay, I gotta chant a lot this morning? For maybe folks that haven't experienced chanting before, like, what is that experience like? What kinds of things were going through your mind?
I mean, you know, it's literally just, I don't know, I have my routine. I go to the gym, and the gym clears my head. I always find when I've gone to the gym, it makes my daimoku. Daimoku is just the Sanskrit term for chanting Nam-myoho-renge-kyo. It just makes it clearer and more direct. So it almost clears my mind. And then, you know, I normally divide the first hour into 4. You know, the first hour is, the first 15 minutes is just chanting to acknowledge that I am a Buddha, which is, you know, an awakened one. Buddha just means awakened one. The second 15 minutes is really about chanting about whatever it is that I want to achieve for my desires, whether it is to have a absolutely amazing day, to, you know, to have a harmonious set, to have a great relationship with my director, to be indispensable to my employees, to just do a great job, you know, that whatever it is that your desires are, is in that 15 minutes. The next 15 minutes are, you know, to fuse my life, my heart with Sensei, Daisaku Keida, so that I'm in rhythm with him. And the last 15 minutes is I chant to do my very best for Kozen Rufu. Now, Kozen Rufu is, again, another one of our Buddhist terms that just means world peace. So that's the first hour. And then the next hour is really more about how the day should go and things like that. You know what I mean? So that's kind of how and, you know, then after I've done that, I'll look at my my lines and make sure they're internalized. But, you know, that's kind of the routine. Yeah, I've found it really, really helpful, because sometimes you can start chanting and you're going all over the place. You're like, I'm trying for this, I'm trying. But when I compartmentalize it into it encapsulates everything. You don't miss anything. You know what I mean?
You don't have to worry at the end, like,
No, did I get that?
everything? Yeah.
No, that's in the 15. So,
Yeah.
and sometimes you feel guilty about just chanting about yourself, but in that 15 minutes, that's all you.
Yeah,
Do
totally.
you know what I mean?
Totally.
So yeah, try it out.
All right, I will. I've got, my list of things that I'm chanting for, but even then, sometimes I'm like, oh, and there's this thing, and there's this thing, and there's that, but we can chant for anything we want, which is, the incredible thing.
Yeah, and the thing about Buddhism is our earthly desires are enlightenment.
Yeah.
Which means whatever you chant for, if it's a new car, a girlfriend, or to win an award, it's always going to lead you to the Gohonzon, which in effect will lead, the Gohonzon is a Sanskrit scroll that we chant to. In effect, it's only going to lead you to your happiness.
Yeah.
So even if you don't even achieve that, you're going to be happy. You're going to get what's going to make you happy. So that earthly desire is, in effect, leading you to. So in Buddhism, there's no judgment.
Yes. Which is something that I really, for a long time, really needed. I'm somebody that's very hard on myself, and I also really chant to just like awaken my Buddhahood and really like treasure my life. So it took me a long time to challenge that, like a self-esteem aspect. But you mentioned chanting for Kosen-rufu, or world peace, and we talked also earlier about the guidance that you had read about having a mission. Of course, now you've finished Euphoria and looking to your life now in the future. What do you feel is your mission as an artist, and how do you feel like, through your life you can really contribute?
Well, one of the things that Daisaku Ikeda says, like Kosen-rufu world peace being, is you can only truly do it authentically by being true to who you are. And so that's what I am. I consider myself a heartist, and I mean that. The only talent and gift that I have is my heart. And that's what I'm here to share. It's mystical. It's telling that my profession is art. Yeah? The other half of that word is he, art, heart. What I'm doing is having a heart-to-heart connection with other human beings through my creative expression. And all I want to do is touch them, move them in a way that's better for their lives. That's it. You know what I mean? I'm a heartist.
I love that. Okay, this is making me think, I don't know if you've seen this, but some comments of interviews of you right now are using the SpongeBob meme that's like super cute and sweet.
Oh boy.
Because like the contrast, right, of you as Alamo Brown and just who you are is like such a like warm, bright, sincere person. It's like, this is so wonderful. It's been so great talking to you.
And you too.
I do have just a couple, more questions. Every interview I ask people for advice. And, since I figured there will be people listening to this that are like, haven't heard of Buddhism and like maybe they're curious, I'm wondering what advice you would give them for like kind of exploring Buddhism and starting their practice.
I think, if you have a seeking spirit, just follow it. I think always ask questions. The thing about Buddhism is it's only going to make you happy. Do you know what I mean? And why wouldn't you want that? That's really at the essence of it. It's the heart that matters. I was going back to the heart. It's like, it's all it's about. So I would just, if you're in a place where you're seeking or searching, just, go along to one of the many centers that we have around the world, but particularly here in LA. It's very welcoming for any guests that can walk in, ask questions. There are books in there. But I would encourage you to ask questions because it will just empower you. The more you know about a philosophy, and I say philosophy because I never look at Buddhism as a religion. I think it's a philosophy of life. A spiritual philosophy of life. And when you look at it that way, whatever else you believe, this is only going to make it better. Use a tool, it's at our disposal. Just go in, find out for yourself,
Yeah, That's great. Thank you. I'm going to be sharing this with all of my friends. So again, thank you so much. This has been really just like so joyful, and hearing your story. Of course, this is very condensed, but just like your life is really so, I guess, like exemplary of like what we can do with Buddhist practice, and like being able to fulfill our own unique mission. And so it's been like really just so wonderful hearing from you. But my closing question is just what you're excited about now, and what dreams you have for your future, whether it's, personal, career, anything.
I mean, like I said, it's about happiness is Buddhism, and that's where I want to arrive at.
Yeah.
Day in and day out, and however that manifests, I'm going to embrace it, and I think that's important, because many times we have ideas of what happiness might look like in our minds, but when you truly hear that inner voice, it might look quite different. And to me, it's not being afraid to embrace whatever that is. But yeah, family, and I think that would be wonderful. Continue to do rich work that can, not only bring people joy and entertainment, but more impact their lives in a way that moves it forward. And share the practice wherever it feels organic, for people, because, these are tumultuous times, and people are suffering. It's hard just to make ends meet. And, if you can offer a philosophy that they can use in their lives, that can help them transform, overcome, and achieve, then I'm happy to do that. But most of all, just be happy and continue doing what I'm doing,
Yes. Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you for your great questions and for having me today. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much.